So now let's talk about Amazon CloudFront. CloudFront is a content delivery network, CDN, and it improves the read performance of whatever you have in the backend because the content is going to be cached at the edge. You have over 200 points of presence globally, and it protects you against DDoS attacks because it is distributed at the edge. It has integration with Shield, WAF, and Route 53. Any application on CloudFront is going to be exposed through HTTPS, and then internally you can talk to HTTP or HTTPS to access any kind of internal applications. There's also support for the WebSocket protocol. So how does that look? Well, we have an application. Say, for example, we deploy a website or files onto an S3 bucket. We want global user to access them. Then a user in America can access a cache in America, which is going to make a request to the S3 bucket, and then after it is going to cache the result of that request in America so that subsequent requests do not have to go back to the S3 bucket. And similarly, for a user in China, we'll go through a point of presence in Asia to access your S3 bucket. So what are the origins of CloudFront, which is what I call the backend? So we can have S3 buckets. This is very helpful for distributing files. And then to get enhanced security between CloudFront and your S3 bucket, we use something called Origin Access Control, OAC. And you may have known OAI, which is the Origin Access Identity. So OAC is a newer version. It's more secure and it's replacing OAI. So CloudFront can be used as an ingress, for example, not just to expose files from Amazon S3, but also to upload files to Amazon S3 globally. S3 buckets can also be configured as a website. In this case, we need to enable static website hosting on the bucket and then expose it as a CloudFront origin. You can also have media store container and media package endpoints to deliver video on demand or live streaming videos with AWS Media Services through CloudFront. You can also expose any kind of custom origin that is using the HTTP protocol, such as an EC2 instance, an elastic load balancer, for example, a classic load balancer or an application load balancer, or an API gateway if you want more control. Otherwise, you can use the API gateway edge that combines already CloudFront, or any HTTP backend you want, for example, something deployed on premises that is exposed publicly. So what if you use S3 as an origin? Well, we have an origin S3 bucket. And again, I told you, there is tight integration between CloudFront and your S3 bucket by using OAC, so the Origin Access Control. So this ensures that then the content of your S3 bucket is going to be cached at the edge in various locations. For example, Los Angeles, for example, Sao Paulo, Mumbai, and then Melbourne. And the idea is that all the requests made to these edge locations, if they have cache content, will be served from the edge, not from the S3 bucket in the origin. Therefore, it improves to you the latency and also the number of requests made on your S3 buckets. So what is the difference between CloudFront and S3 cross-region replication? Well, with CloudFront, you get a global edge network and files are cached for a time to live, maybe a day, and it's great for static content that must be available everywhere. If you use S3 cross-region replication, you must set up it for every region you want to replicate to, and the files are going to be updated in near real time. It's read-only, and so it's great if you have dynamic content that needs to be available at low latency in a few regions. So they have a very different use cases. You can also use CloudFront with an origin of HTTP types, for example, an EC2 instance or an application balancer. So in this case, the EC2 instance must be public so that the edge locations can access your EC2 instance. And it's possible for you to customize a security group so that you only allow the public IPs of the edge locations. It's also possible for you to expose your application through an application load balancer. Again, the ALB must be public, the EC2 instances can be private, and therefore, on the security group of the ALB, you allow the public IPs of the edge locations, and then you have normal security between your EC2 instances and your ALB. There's also a trick to even further and increase the security of your ALB in CloudFront, is that to prevent direct access to your ALB or your custom origin, you can use what's called a custom HTTP header, so that CloudFront adds a very secret header and sends it to the ALB for every request made through CloudFront, and then you configure the ALB or your custom origin to only forward requests to your backend if that custom HTTP header is seen, and therefore the header name and the value must be kept secret. So how does that look? Well, you have your users accessing CloudFront. CloudFront, they will perform this kind of HTTP request, and CloudFront is going to add a custom header with a secret value. And then your origin, would it be your application balancer or your custom origin, will have some logic so that anything that does not have this custom header and this custom value will be discarded, else it will be forwarded to your backend. And therefore, any user trying to directly access your origin will get rejected because that custom header will not be present. On top of it, you can also restrict from a network perspective access to your origin by using security groups and only allowing the CloudFront public IP addresses. Okay, finally, we have origin groups. So this is to increase high availability and do failover. So an origin group has one primary and one secondary origin, so that if the primary origin fails, then the second one is being used. And the beautiful thing is that the origins can be cross AWS region, which is good for disaster recovery. So we have CloudFront, and say we have one origin group in US East 1, that's our primary origin, and then a second origin, origin B, in EU West 1. Therefore, we have cross-region high availability. So the request will be made to the primary origin, but in case there is an error status code, then the same request is going to be sent to our second origin, and hopefully we get an OK back. It's also possible to do this with S3 buckets, so that you have region level high availability for S3 buckets. So again, you would have a primary origin and a secondary origin for your S3 buckets, but you would set up replication between the two buckets so that if one bucket is down, then CloudFront can try the same request on the second bucket in another region that hopefully should have data up to date thanks to replication, and that should be up thanks to availability. Okay, so that's it for CloudFront, the first part. I hope you liked it, and I will see you in the next lecture.